a little bit about my background. So I think I've already said my name, Maritza, she, her. I have been, well, to Steve's point, right, practicing and having practical skills. I'll confess I've been practicing since I was very young. My grandmother pointed that out to me when she saw that I've been doing all of these different talk shows and things. But she's like, yeah, you've been doing this since you were little with the hairbrush in the mirror. And I would say, hello, this is the news. And so, or reading newspapers out loud, which was, at the time, it seemed kind of, oh, just a silly little kid thing to do. But it actually did help me project. It helped me with my confidence, and it helped me kind of prepare for being on camera with another person. And my cousins and I, this is before the YouTube era, we had like our little 8mm cameras, and we would go around and just put people on camera and be like, tell us all about yourself, because we were weird and also pretty intrusive young people. But it helped, that all of that built up where I am today. So you can catch me on shows. I also have a show here, History in Lowell. Been doing that for 5 years. I've been on panel conversations. I've moderated conversations. Also work at the public access station in Cambridge now. But all of these things, like even something like this, it helps you. It helps you in your interviewing skills. It helps you in your hosting skills. I've hosted game shows, which can be really hilarious and ridiculous, but it's that acting that comes in here. I have no acting background, but when you see Maritza doing a game show, you would think that I'm an improv artist. Well, let me not toot my own horn too much because I'm not that great at it, but I have a lot of fun. And I think that no matter what you're doing when you're interviewing, even if it's a serious conversation, like you want to interview somebody about their book or their art, right? You have to be having a good time. If you're not having a good time, your guest is not going to have a good time. The people watching are not going to be having a good time. If you are like, oh, I'm stumbling with these words and I don't know, and I'm going to look down at my notes the whole time, we know that's probably not the best interview, right? There's so many different types of interviews out there. We have like talk shows, podcasts, documentaries, vlogs, right? Run and gun style, all of these things. But it's all really about you as a person, making yourself feel comfortable and making the person that you're interviewing feel comfortable. And maybe if you have an audience, I think having an audience is like the scariest type of like hosting and interviewing, because you know they're watching. That for me is like, oh, I'm sweating. Even right now, like I'm sweating. Like it could be just because it's wicked humid outside, but being in front of people, it gets me going and it makes me nervous. Public speaking, that's what you're doing. It's public speaking at its like finest, I think, because now you're engaging another person. You have to be aware of yourself, and you also have to be aware of your subject, right? But you have to be interested. So thank you all for introducing yourselves, and thank you all for being here. That's me with the former mayor. What's his face? No disrespect. But yeah, that was during Folk Fest. I think, I don't know which Folk Fest it was, but it was the first time I had done a Folk Fest interview, and they were like, oh, you're gonna interview the mayor. And I was like, what do I talk about? I don't even know like what to say. But afterwards, and I'll tell you another thing about me personally, I kind of black out when I'm on. It's like compartmentalizing like Maritza as a person, but Maritza as a host. You get a mic in my hand and suddenly I am on stage and that's it. So then when it's done, I have no recollection of what happened. And so I'll ask everybody around me, how did that go? But he was like, you know, you have a really nice way of making people feel at ease. And that is what you want your subject to leave with. That is what you want your guest to leave with. That they felt good, that they felt comfortable, that they felt like they could put their message across. So what makes a great interview? I'm going to ask you all. What's that, Steve?
I don't know, but I didn't even know it was about making people, your guests feel comfortable and giving them space to say what they can say. I didn't
Yeah, it's so important.
Is that what it's about?
What'd you say? Why is it?
Yeah,
Why?
yeah, I mean, you just, yeah.
Think about it. The more comfortable a person is, the more they'll tell you. The more you'll get whatever your goal is as the interviewer, you can draw that out of a person the more comfortable. I know if I'm more relaxed, I will, well, actually, if I'm anxious or relaxed, I will talk your ear off either way. But other folks, the more relaxed that they are, the more they'll just, anything that you want them to say will come out. It's very, it's because it's like having a natural conversation. It makes them forget that the cameras are there. It makes them forget the lights that are on them. When you're comfortable and you're having a good time and you make them feel like, because think about it, if you're nervous or your guest probably is nervous, the amount of people that I've had come into the studio upstairs on History and Lowell that have come in like, oh, I don't know, I'm like, they're wringing their hands and they might not even know me, they might not know my co-host Bob, but they know they have to talk about something. They know that they have to be informative. They know they have to be, they're trying to get information across and they don't always know what we're gonna ask them. So they're nervous. They see the cameras and they start freaking out. They see the lights. The lights always get people. It's like you get really hot under those lights. And so the more comfortable that you can make them, the more relaxed they'll forget about everything else. They'll forget they're even on a show. And then the conversation becomes more natural. And then you get all the information that you want.
So that makes sense for people who might be doing this for non-professionals. If you've got somebody who's been on camera a million times and behind a microphone a million times, knows how to lie, it's a different story, right?
Definitely. But that, I would suggest taking a journalism class because that's a whole different ball game. There are people who are really good at lying, who are really comfortable lying. And you have to, that's part of a good interview is asking the right questions that even if they're lying, there was an interview that I was watching the other day and it was like, it was one of those like trying to, a gotcha journalism type of situation. And the lady thought she was gonna get this guy like, oh yeah, we're gonna mess with him. We're gonna throw him off his game. And that's the thing about an interviewer too. They can also steer the conversation into what they want it to be. And they can also manipulate the information, right? That's the power that we hold as interviewers, as hosts. But the guest was so on point with what he knew, he was able to turn it around. And so that's kind of, that's also a thing that you got to look out for as an interviewer. You have to be on your toes. You also have to know the information. We'll go more into that. But you're right. So I highly recommend though, a journalism class for, to make sure if you are interviewing a person, how do you have the conversation have integrity? Because that's what you're looking for, right? So that's part of, I'm no journalist. And I wouldn't even consider myself necessarily a professional, but at this point now, maybe. But when I used to go upstairs, the very first time I was doing my show, and I was just interviewing me and Bob. Bob is a professor at UML, for those of you who don't know. He's a history professor, and that's how you know us, Steve. I used to come in with a list of questions. He would tell me what we're gonna talk about. He would give me some homework to do. And then I'd come in and I would be so nervous and I'd be like, okay. And I would rehearse my questions over and over again. After about like the fourth show, I stopped doing that. I stopped even doing the homework, which is not always the best idea. You should definitely do your homework. But after you do it a few times and you get into a rhythm of it, sometimes you're gonna have a terrible interview. And sometimes it's not your fault. Sometimes a guest is just dry and they just will do yes or no questions. And no matter how many times you reiterate the question or you try to like reframe it or rephrase it, they're just gonna give you not what you want. In those cases, if you think that the person you're interviewing is gonna be flat, you wanna have as much information as possible that you can talk around and think about what your goal is. So I'm gonna put this question back out to y'all. What do you think makes an interview great? Oh, I thought you were raising your hand.
Oh,
I was like,
yeah,
yeah, Casey.
I guess like keeping your guests engaged, I guess, in a conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, like keeping them like going, you know. I guess like what you just said, like I guess like carrying that weight, I guess, if they're more apprehensive to be like be the big, voice in the conversation, I guess, like,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you got to keep them engaged.
yeah.
I think, unless it's again one of those, I guess, more combative interviews, trying to kind of interrogate. I think a lot of times, an interviewer kind of stepping back and allowing the guest space to kind of talk more.
Yeah.
Really allowing them to kind of build on what they want to say and do that and not being too, I'm remembering that they have to say it, too, I don't know, over control of what they're saying.
Yeah.
Giving them their space to do their.
Yes, let your guests lead. That's probably one of the best interviews you can see is when somebody's excited about what they're talking about, pulling that out of them and then letting them fly with that information. Because they'll probably give you more than what you're looking for, and more than what you even knew. So yeah, absolutely, giving space. I love that.
Also, making more relatable.
Yeah, you have to always remember somebody wants this information. Somebody out there is watching and they want to know what is going on. What does the viewer want to know? That's what you're doing, right? That's the whole point of this interview is you're trying to give information. Well, there could be multiple reasons why you're interviewing, but it's information. And you're trying to translate that information to somebody else. So yeah, making it relatable. Absolutely. Ed, do you have anything to share? Do you have anything to share?
Well, with regards to all of this, really, the interview needs to spend some time preparing for the interview. Like I won't do this thing on the with the author until I've read the book.
Yeah, that's very smart. I've actually interviewed somebody who was talking about their book, and I didn't look at their book or even the description of their book. And I was like, all right, so tell me about it from start to finish. And it was really tough to do because I didn't read anything about it. And I knew generally what they were going to be talking about, but like, it was really weird because it was very obvious I had no idea about the book. So that is, yes, be prepared, do your research, do your homework, because otherwise you're going to get a real weird, funky interview. And it could be fun. And the person definitely, depending on how well they can talk about their information, right? If they talk about it really well, give them space, boom, yeah, you tell me. I'm not going to lie to you. That's kind of how I got through some English classes in school, talking to the person who actually read the book. But if you can draw that information out, if you can make it relatable, like what would you tell somebody who might not even be interested in this genre? How do you get them interested in this genre, right? You can draw that out of them. So it's really thinking about what it is that you're trying to get, what information you're trying to get. But yes, thank you. You all know what makes a great interview. So boom, you're interviewers now. No, you already know. You're good. So there are generally two types of interviews. Those hard-hitting ones, right, where your goal is to find something out. Those are when you're asking the tough questions. It doesn't necessarily have to be an aggressive, combative interview, but it's definitely like one of those things that maybe somebody might be more resistant. They might want to lie, right? Maybe you're trying to get a politician to talk about something that they don't want to talk about. That's a hard interview. And not hard because it's challenging, but it is probably a way more challenging type of interview. And then there's your soft interview, where we have the same goal, where we want to tell people about your book, where we want to showcase your art style, or we want to tell people about history, right? Or whatever the case is. We have the same goal. But in a hard interview, the interviewer is controlling what the goal is. And the interviewee might not have any idea what your goal is. So that's more of like a journalistic type of style. And the soft interview is more like we're all here for the same reasons. And I think it's an easier type. So that could be like well, actually, podcast could fall in either of those. Any type of like place where you would see an interview could fall in either of those categories. Like you see run and gun style a lot on TikTok now. I know like not everybody's probably familiar with that, but on TikTok you have these kids now who'll just walk up to random people on the street and say very inflammatory things to people or ask very inflammatory questions. And it's like, whoa, why did you think that was okay to ask a stranger? And some strangers participate in these things. And then there are the softer ones where they're like, hey, what's your definition of happiness? Hello, welcome. And like it still throws people off, but that's not actually a soft interview. That is definitely still a hard interview because the interviewer has that goal. It could be nice, right? It could be friendly, but it's still a hard interview because you are trying to find something out from strangers. So I'm gonna keep it going. So yeah, we're talking about styles of interviews. So spontaneous, prepared, or both. I have talk show or run and gun because that's generally what they are. Like a podcast is a talk show. You have a documentary style interview, and that's usually the interviewer is usually off the screen for that. I've done a couple of these styles where actually I have a documentary, but that's more of we're both talking to each other, we're both on camera. And then there are times where the interviewer is off camera and they're asking the person questions. Those actually, when you have a guest, and because I think you said, Ed, you might be thinking about doing documentary style. So there's a couple of ways to do that. It makes the person comfortable if you sit next to the camera, because you don't want, you've all seen documentaries before, right? And usually the person's kind of looking off to the side. They're not looking right at the camera when they're giving their answers. And those are a little bit tougher to do because people just answer your questions like they're just talking to you, but they have to answer like they're talking to the viewer, right? And so you have to kind of coax them to like, let's reframe the question. Can you repeat the question in your answer? Sometimes you have to coach people a bit before interviews. Run and gun, sometimes you're able to do that. And Casey, you did some at Folk Fest. What was that like?
It was interesting because, I don't know, it's always kind of funny like approaching people to be like, just that first, like, hey, do you have time for like an interview? You know, like that's like such a, you know, like, you know, I guess I don't know, I was surprised with some people who did say yes. They were like, oh, they're not going to say, this person's not going to want to do an interview, but I'm going to ask anyway. I'll be like, hey,
Yeah.
do you have time for an interview? And they're like, yes, of course. And like, oh, okay, let's do this then. That's always fun. And I guess like trying to figure out what this person wants to talk about, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I guess because if they're agreeing to do the interview, it's clear, I guess they have at least something to say, right? I guess they're trying to figure out what that is.
Oh, that is the best way to describe run and gun interviews. Everyone has something to say, just trying to figure out what it is. Actually, any interview, really. Everyone has something to say, but what is it? And how do you get it out of them? That's the hardest part, I think, of being, I probably have said this is the hardest part of a bunch of times, but that is definitely up there because it's hard when, if you don't have an end goal and you're just trying to get information out of people just to do it sometimes, right? Because you want to get content, you want to get footage. How do you make people want to talk? And how do you make those people who just are like, yeah, go ahead. And then they just stand there. It's like, but you said you wanted to do this. But how do you get them to, you know, get something across, get their voice heard, right? Can we think of any other types of talk shows? There's like, I think I mentioned a whole bunch, right? So like there's panels, there's roundtable talks. There are conversations where you are moderating. Maybe it's like a forum, right? I'm gonna tell you guys a secret, and I guess I'm telling the world the secret. But I have been asked to moderate candidate forums a couple of times. That's not my jam. This is not fun for me. So I don't want to do that. I don't want to interview political candidates. Like, I'm just not interested. That doesn't feel like a thing that I am best suited for. It's a very serious environment, I don't always know what people want to know when it comes to politics. I know what I want to know, but it's very, very skewed. And I don't know I'm not a journalist. I don't know how to separate my own opinions about politics and things from the candidates. I wouldn't be good at that. So I do not put myself in an environment that I know I'm going to fail. Well, in my mind, I'm going to fail, but I probably would be able to do a good job if I did my research and if I was prepared and if I thought about what people wanted to know, and I would ask people. That's how I would prepare. I'd be like, what would you want to know from these candidates, right? But I don't want to do that. That's not fun for me. I like game shows. I like talk shows, even talk shows that are informative. I love doing those because I'm in my mind, I'm a learner. I'm a student. And so that's how I approach those things. But in a forum like that, it is not comfortable for me. But that's a different type, right? So think about when you're thinking about what kind of interview you want to do. And even some of these skills that we're talking about could be good for like just basic interviews, like a job interview. It's all about being comfortable. Like think about a job interview, right? You go in. The way that I did my last job interview, the one that I have now, I thought in my mind, I pretended that there was a camera watching. I was going to say I'm very bad. I've gotten way better at talking about myself in a constructive way in interviews, because it's hard to do that. Nobody teaches you how to talk about yourself and your accomplishments and your achievements, right? And selling yourself to somebody. So I just pretended that it was a documentary about my life, about my work history and what I could contribute. I treated it like a TV show interview. And boom, I got the job, but it probably worked also because it was public access. So, but those kinds of things definitely help you. I started getting more comfortable. The person interviewing me was totally relaxed. She was like wearing faded jeans and a sweatshirt, and we were sitting on a couch, and she was leaning like this. And so I got more comfortable. I was in my professional clothes, and I was just like this at first, and then the more comfortable she got, the more comfortable I got, and the more relaxed I was, the more I was able to talk about myself and like what I could contribute. And that's when it all started clicking for me. That's how you give an interview. That's how you do an interview, even on TV. You make the person comfortable. And sometimes you always want to be professional, right? No matter if it's like a silly podcast, which I also do a video podcast. I forgot to mention that. I just do too many things. And it's called I'm Bad at This with my coworker Bestie, who actually taught a workshop here about storytelling at some point in time in the past, like month or so. I don't know when, but at some point. And so it's called I'm Bad at This. And we talk about how we're bad at being humans, but really we're working towards being better. And in that environment, it's very silly. But as soon as that camera goes on, it's still like, it could be silly, but it's super professional. Like we know what we want to talk about. We talk about it beforehand. We like have a conversation about it to prepare, and we work together. We work really well off of each other. Like we have a good so if you're ever doing like a talk show with another person, you want to have that chemistry. And it's kind of good to if you're going to bring guests, to get to know them too before you have them on camera. That also makes people a little bit more comfortable. So your responsibilities as the host, be a fan. The reason I say be a fan, like especially if you're gonna interview people about their work, like Ed said, read the book, right? Do your research, do your homework, be prepared. But don't just be prepared, be a fan. Because the more you're a fan, even if you don't like the person, even if you don't know the person, even if you never want to talk to the person again after that interview, it still creates great content. It will create a great interview, and it will make people want to watch it. You'll get off the camera and people will be like, whoa, you really love that person. You'll be like, absolutely not. But that might be Casey's acting skills, right? So be a fan. And we were just talking about this, build rapport. Put your guests at ease. If you can't meet with them for like a coffee, sometimes all you can do is email back and forth, but you can ask questions ahead of time. I like to give my guests a general outline. I don't always get to ask questions ahead of time. I might just be meeting them for the first time upstairs. Like literally they're coming upstairs, we're getting mic'd up, and I'm like, hey, so how do you say your name? That is so important. I ask people several times, even if it's something like John Smith. I'm like, so it's John Smith? John Smith, right? And what's your title? Your title is like the economic director of sustainability at some wild, long university name, right? I'm gonna say that at least 3 times. So it sounds good to them and it sounds good to me, and so they know that I care to put them in a good light. There have been times that I definitely flubbed, but the great thing about being on camera, if you're not live, you can always edit and post. You can always start again. You can always say, actually, can we do that one more time? I think I've done that maybe out of all of the interviews I've done, like a handful of times, maybe like 5 times, where I've just came in, I was not prepared, I was probably tired or had a migraine or something like that. And you can let your guests know how you're feeling, because they'll also like contribute more. Like if you're not feeling the best, people sometimes contribute more. And they also see you as a human, which is always awesome. Coming up with great questions during the interview. Okay, during the interview. Come up with as many questions as you want beforehand, but sometimes a guest might steer way away from what you thought you were gonna do. If you have great questions during, it shows interest. It shows that you're actively listening to what they're saying, and it gives them the space, right? Like Natasha was saying earlier, to kind of just keep going. But make sure that you're paying attention. I can tell you that there have been times where I've zoned out during interviews because I was bored and I wasn't having the best time, and the content was, I was just like, oh, this is so intensely boring. Who cares about this? And then I had to come back and be like, actually somebody cares about this. And what would somebody who cares about this want to know? And I brought it back on track. I don't think that the guests knew that I had spaced out. I hope they didn't know. But you have to be engaged. Remember I said in the beginning, you have to always be on. Avoid yes or no questions and scripted answers. If you ask a yes or no question, you will get a yes or no. And that is the driest, most bland interview ever. Like, so do you like dogs? Yes. ... Crickets, crickets. More like, hey, so I know that you're a really big dog fan. What's your favorite dog of all time and why? And then like something like that. You know what I mean? Leave room for people to expand their answers. And if they don't, because sometimes people don't, oh, I heard that you really love dogs. What's your favorite? Oh yeah, I do love dogs. I don't know dog names. Collies, those are dogs, right? Yeah. Oh, I love collies. Oh yeah, well, I don't know much about collies. Can you tell me more about why that's your favorite dog? What about them draws you to them? You know what I mean? You want to get those questions. And if you've so I also realized part of my background that is important in my interviewing skills is facilitation. Not necessarily what I'm doing now, but yes, kind of. But working with children, because you want to make sure that they understand. So if you ever get the chance to work with kids, highly recommend. Also, to protect your sanity, don't do it for longer than 5 years. Or at least have some support systems built in. But they are a really great way to gauge information, because you have to ask them these supporting questions. You have to draw information out of them. You have to see, okay, did you learn what you're supposed to learn? How do you know if a kid learned what they're supposed to learn? Because you have to ask them questions and they have to give you information. That's pretty much the same skills here. Avoid yes or no questions and avoid scripted answers. They could give you a definition for something. Ask them to explain how that works in the real life, in real world, you know what I mean? So it's the same kind of thing. Sometimes I do pretend that I'm talking to, if it's like a boring interview, I pretend that it's like a 6-year-old who's telling me something that they learned about science or whatever. I don't know, I love science. I don't know, I can't think of a boring thing. Okay, sand. Maybe somebody is giving me information about sand. Wow, why are we talking about sand right now? Well, where can you find sand in the world? what's important about it? And you can actually get information. I learned about how important sand dunes are one time. Had no idea how important they are. Don't walk on them. I can't tell you why right now because it came in my ear and out the other, but for that particular moment, it was super important. And I treated that person like they were the most important person in the world. And that's what you do. Just like with a kid, they are the most important person in the world in that moment. And then you have to manage and follow the flow, right? So you're in charge. You are in charge of this conversation. It's your responsibility. You want to be relatable. You want to remember your viewers. You want to make sure that you are allowing the conversation to flow, but also reeling people in when they start going off on tangents. This is not what we want to know about. This is not what we care about. Like, we want to weave the threads together. And if you're ever doing a live like show, or you're hosting a game show or something, or you're doing a run and gun, you want to weave the thread together. So if you were doing Folk Fest, right, you're on the street, well, obviously you're going to ask somebody about what's happening right then. And if they start talking about like other things like, well, I really wish that they would have fixed the streets last week, and there's problems with these lights and they need to put in a stop sign over here. Yeah, safety is important. So tell me more about how safe you feel in this environment at this festival. Like, do you feel comfortable in large crowds? Because it is a large crowd. Bring it back. Find a way to circle it back around, because people will definitely do their own dance, but you have to lead the dance. Everything that I do, it comes back to dance, because that's also a past life. And then don't ever forget to show gratitude. You thank your guests, you thank the viewers, and that is how you wrap it up. And part of managing and following the flow is also managing time. I think that I talk about that in one of the next slides. We'll talk about that in a second. Always remember your why. Always, always, always. Why are we even having this interview? What do people want to know? What do you want to know? We talked about hard interviews, so that's that first part, finding out information that maybe they don't want to tell you, that journalistic type of interview. Sometimes you just want stories, you just want to entertain. That might be a podcast type of vibe, right? Or a historical record. So you're interviewing people because you want to like immortalize their work or whatever they're doing forever, right? Or literally doing a show about history so that it's accessible to other people, so you can educate people, but you have a record of this. Maybe it's just about your life. Maybe you're doing a daily vlog about what you're doing. You don't know who that could be useful for, but it could be useful to somebody. Think about anything that you consume. I always try to put myself in the shoes of what I'm consuming so that I know this is what somebody, like you said, be relatable, right? This is what somebody else might want to know about, so I'm going to do it this way. Sometimes you think people don't care about certain things, but they do. There's somebody out there who cares. There's always an audience for what you're doing. Just make sure you stay on task. And to help the interviewee get their information across, a book, their artwork, I don't know, anything else that they might be doing. Those are the two things that we've talked about, so I'm going to keep it in that realm. But anything that when you share that goal, so that's that soft interview, when you share that goal, these are the things, these are probably 4 potential reasons that you might be doing an interview. Time. Pacing is important. It's like what Natasha said, let the guests talk, don't rush them. You might be anxious about time. It depends, right? So if you're doing like a run and gun style, that could be like 5 to 7 minutes, could be shorter. And that time goes really quickly. I do 25 to 27 minutes for my talk shows. And then maybe if you're doing like a round table with a panel full of people, that might be like 45 to 55 minutes. Pacing is so important. Sometimes people rush through the information and we're done in 15 minutes. Now, what do? You want to go back to maybe to the top. Maybe you want to like get people to draw out those answers a little bit more. So you mentioned this at the beginning. How did you even come about finding this information? Tell me more about your background in this. Maybe they didn't talk about that yet, right? And always keep it natural. The more natural, the better. The more engaging the conversation, the better. All of these skills are really just having a conversation and active listening. I don't think that I wrote that down anywhere. I just realized this is one of the roundtables I was talking about. This is on self-care and nonprofits, but I'm currently running on fumes. And I was joking with Wednesday earlier that I was literally begging these people to give me something, and that was how that interview went. They didn't want to, my goal was to get strategies or skills for self-care for people who work in nonprofits. And my boss had watched it and she was like, oh, that interview, that roundtable went really great. But people who know you know that you were running on fumes, that you were a little bit manic in that discussion. I had also just facilitated a 4-hour workshop with my staff on processes, which was unbelievably fun. But after doing that for 4 hours, I was exhausted. I was so tired, and I had just been tired from the week. And so I'm here. You can see in my pocket, I had written down some things I wanted to talk about. At no point in time did I look at those things. I just was like, well, if I write it down, it'll be in my head. Nope. I was just, please give me something about self-care. And like at one point, like this guy right here, he was hilarious. We were talking about, well, it's not just baths and things, we were talking about self-care. And he was like, oh, well, I would love a bath. And then he said something that was borderline inappropriate, and it woke everybody up. And it was awesome and hilarious. So you can play off of that, and then sometimes the guests play off of each other. And like, especially when everybody here is bad at self-care. I'm gonna tell you, no, they're great. They're wonderful people. When you work in the community, you give. And the whole thing was, okay, but how do you give back to yourself? How do you give back to yourself? And so I kept coming back to that, and I kept asking the question in different ways. And they knew, they were picking up what I was putting down. Like this lovely woman saw me Wednesday and she goes, are you self-caring enough, Maritza? And I was like, well, actually right now, yes, because we're at a community event and I feel really good. But their whole thing was that their work is part of their self-care, and it's hard to separate those things. And so I had to kind of reframe and rethink how I was what the goal of the conversation was, right? It no longer became about strategies. It became about, well, the work that we have to find ways to take care of ourselves and each other while doing the work that we do. And I had to let them talk, because if I didn't let them talk, if I just kept trying to get my goal out and only trying to get those self-care strategies, it would have been a boring conversation, and they would have been like, well, I don't know, and I don't want to do this anymore. You know what I mean? But I had to let them talk and listen. And then I made the people in production also give me signals. So I was like, all right, well, when we're reaching like the 30-minute mark, give me a 5-minute warning so I can decide, do I want this conversation to go longer than the 27 minutes, or do I want it to stop? Should I wrap at that time? And so that's part of your job as a host, as the interviewer. You have to be aware of so many things. You have to be aware of your guests, how comfortable they are. You have to be aware of your viewers. You have to be aware of yourself, the information, right? Be prepared and have the homework. And you have to be aware of the time. That's your job. It's not easy now that I'm thinking about it. Like, I do it a lot because I love it, but I never thought about, until I was doing this and preparing these slides, I never thought about how tough it actually is to be managing all of these things all the time while being the actor, right? Because no matter what you're acting, that's what you're doing. Even if you're interested, you could be acting as yourself. I cosplay Maritza all the time. That's one of my favorite things to do because self-care is lacking. So somebody else comes on. It's the inside Maritza that comes on. But you have to constantly be managing all of these things. Cosplay Maritza, she knows what she's talking about. I trust her. Me as a person, don't let me in front of a camera when I'm exhausted. Then I will just ramble. And sometimes you might have noticed that it's happened during this presentation. So forgive me. But you can also do things like that make you more human and it comes across to the viewers, make your guests more human too. So keeping it conversational, be friendly. You don't always have to be friendly depending on the type of interview you're doing, but you also don't want to antagonize someone to the point that they don't want to give you information. So if you're doing one of those harder hitting interviews, always just keep it as conversational as possible. Make sure you're listening, make sure you're doing active listening, right? You're staying engaged. And that way it makes it easier to come up with follow-up questions. And I've said this so many times during this presentation workshop. You want to just keep people calm, even if it's one of those harder interviews, because if they're not calm and they recognize that you're trying to dig into them or frame them in a negative light, you're gonna just lose the interview, right? But if you, at least if you're acting and you're on and you pretend to be their friend and you're interested about, like, you can make anybody look stupid. It's really easy actually to make people trip over themselves and to make people like eat their words. All you have to do is rephrase what they said back to them, but in a friendly way. I have taken people down, and this sounds really weird as I'm saying it out loud, but I have reduced entitled, privileged people to ashes by just like making them just say words that they said out loud over again and repeating it back to them. So when you said this, is this what you meant? Because this is what it sounded like. I don't know if anybody watches Schitt's Creek, but I'm really obsessed with it. And it's really easy to get people to say what you want them to say, as long as you're friendly. Like, kill them with kindness. It really actually works. But also prepare people. So we talked about people might be nervous when they're coming in. You can tell them, actually, I'm nervous too. I get a little bit of stage fright before doing this. It makes them feel better. Sometimes it makes them more nervous. So gauge your person, right? But tell them where they're gonna sit, let them know what's gonna happen. Once again, I like working with kids makes me see the world as we're all just like, no matter what your age is, we're all kids because we're all still growing and developing, hopefully, as people, right? And so when you treat people like they're in a stage of learning and growth, it's much easier to help them feel comfortable. So, oh, this is what we're gonna do. You explain what's gonna happen first. You explain how you're gonna go through. I wanna touch on these points, but we might talk about other things. Don't give them your whole rundown of questions. Don't do that, because then that's how you get scripted answers. I did that one time because, the person knew what the interview was gonna be because we were doing a Zoom interview, and the person my producer, didn't hit the record button. This has only happened like maybe 2 or 3 times in like the 5 years that I've been doing things. It hurts because you get such good information and then the guest is like, oh, I know what you're going for. And so a 27-minute conversation turned into 15 minutes because she already knew what I wanted. And so she was like lumping other answers in to her original answers. And I was just like, you're killing me, Smalls. But yeah, so I lost track of what I was saying, but yeah, you don't give them your answers. Help set them up for success. And when they feel successful, you'll be successful. This is the game show. That's a group of young people. At CCTV, we have a school year production program and our youth media program. And we're trying to do more intergenerational activities so that they feel more integrated into the group. And one of these things is our Cambridge Community Game Night. And this was Pictionary, and it was hilarious. Like, I think you can find it on Vimeo. It's so funny because some of these young people are natural stars. Like, they get in front of a camera and they're so good. Some people are like that. Some people will do your job for you. And then you have your shyer ones. Some of these young people were a little bit more shy. And there was like a group that was super loud and then a group that was more quiet. And they were like, I was like, so tell me about your experience at CCTV and the youth media program. Why are you here? Like, and one girl, well, 2 girls were like, I want to build my confidence. And that was in the beginning. And then at the end, they didn't win. Their team name was the winners. It's hilarious. They didn't win, but the way that we had each team playing on each other, by the end, they were like, well, we didn't win, but you know what? We did a great job. And they were totally more confident by the end. And it was awesome to see. And that was because we were all having a good time. That was legitimately what happened. They forgot that we were doing something on camera. And so those were all improv interviews, which was really hilarious to do with young people. They also like snuck in during other interviews and started like booing the other team. It was great. Like they understood the assignment. But again, the more fun that you have, the more fun everyone is having. Cool. And now we've reached the question portion. Anybody have any questions for me? I love these graphics. Canva is awesome. Sorry. Yes, Casey.
I guess I'm kind of curious, I guess, like from your experience, when you maybe conduct an interview and then there might be like, there might get like tumultuous or there might be like tension, you know, or like that, you know, or like a miscommunication, something like that, and it throws things off track. I guess like what are some tactics of yours to get back on track or like reinvigorate the conversation or just like make your interviewee feel like they can keep going?
Humor.
Okay.
Humor is the easiest way to go. Or you can throw yourself under the bus.
Yeah, right.
I find that self-deprecation is often, it either makes people feel uncomfortable, but if it's like if they got mad, if you like throw yourself under the bus, then it makes somebody uncomfortable enough that you can shift the energy. But humor is the best way to go, because that one humanizes you, it humanizes them. You can even like say, oh, well, we'll edit that in post, and like just like break the tension. So you'll have to develop your own strategies for that, because you know, you can teach a comedy class, but you can't teach personal humor. And I'm also, in my mind, a very awkward person. And so I'm constantly like, we'll see, awkward, self-deprecating, right? I'm constantly like, oops, oh, sorry, sweating, or something like that. Or like, oh, wow, that really, well, I'll say something like, I didn't know that we were going to have a rumble in the jungle, but to bring it back, and I'll just say, I'm bringing it back. I'm reclaiming control over this. I might say, oh, well, that made me sweat more than I already was, you know, or something like that. So you have to develop like your style, but definitely humor. Humor breaks tension like 85% of the time. And I say 85 because there's that 15% where people are just going to be like, nope. I'm mad and I don't want to answer any more of your questions. Yeah. And in that case, you might just have to end the interview. Yeah. Also, sometimes you can, if it's not a live interview, just always remember you can edit it out in post. That is like one of my favorite tools. You can edit anything out. And I don't advise doing this, but if you do have editing skills and the interview didn't go well, you can like throw in like B-roll sometimes. Maybe you want to say something else, like throw in some voiceovers, add information in that maybe, and send it to the person before you publish it so that they're okay with how it went, if you are the person who's doing your production. I'm not the person who does my productions, but like for I'm Bad at This, Peter is our production person, so he like will like do really cool things with the camera. He'll like sometimes add a graphic in or something like that. Like I was gonna say he knows how to tell a story, but like that's literally the workshop that he did here. But he knows how to like pull a cohesive story together if something seems to be lacking in there. So you can like be creative with your camera, like camera shots. You can get creative with maybe you want to like throw in a graphic, maybe you want to throw in like a mini infomercial or a PSA, or you can even be funny in your own post and say technical difficulties because the guest was being difficult or something like that. Like maybe you don't want to say the guest was being difficult, but like you can throw stuff in there that makes it kind of go. So yeah, absolutely. Did you have a question? Sorry, what's your name? Sorry, Rose? Yeah, no worries. Yes. Hello, Rose. Yes. That is such a good question because we have been talking more about like people who don't give enough. Yeah, when people give too much, you have to recognize the cutoff point, and then you'll have to interject. It's tricky biscuits because you don't want to make the person feel like you're not listening to them. But again, like that person who's like, well, I want to talk about the roads and how bad the roads are, right? So that's not what we're talking about. How do you make that person say, how do you make that person stop? I have lots of wordy people as guests. And so I think what I usually do is like, actually, if I may, sometimes you just have to straight up interrupt them and you can apologize and say, oh, you know what? We are on a time crunch and I would love to hear more about this, but that's going to be next time or something like that. Like there, so that's one way of doing it. You can say, oh, you know, actually, I don't mean to stop you there, but you said something really interesting to get them back on task. Or sometimes you just have to like say, like, you can tell them in advance, I only have a limited amount of time. And even if they start like trailing off and you control that time, you already let them know this is the amount of time that we have. So you're gonna have to say, I'm gonna have to stop you there, Chief. Thank you so much for joining us, you know. So you have to do uncomfortable things sometimes. And then there's ways to kind of subtly do it. Some people know that they are quite verbose, and they will apologize and they might do the awkward sweat thing, but like they know themselves, and you can tell the difference between a person who knows themselves because they might overtalk in a way that's like, oh, I see your anxiety, and sometimes they need somebody to stop them. So in that case, you just got to be like, you know what? You're making some excellent points here, and we can all learn from this person. So always making the person feel heard, good, and also like managing all of the flow and the time, I think again, being a host is way harder than than what it seems. But yes, I hope that answers. Awesome. Any other questions? Yes. Practice. Honestly, it's practice. After a while, like when you're first doing interviews, 20 minutes can feel like 3 hours. And then once you've been doing it for a while, 20 minutes feels like 2 minutes. Sometimes 2 minutes feels like a long time. So time is weird. We all know it's not real. It's a construct, but you have to practice. So I would say get a friend, and just like set a timer and just start having, like, if you want to do something like this, have those conversations, do interesting things, record yourself doing it, because I think that would be cool. You can submit it to the channels, right? That all the access stations always need content. Am I right, Wednesday? We always need content. So you can practice in your room, or practice here, practice with each other. I think actually we're going to practice now. Ha, 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 ha. I didn't even do that on purpose, but because that was a great buildup. But yeah, that's the best way to do it. Also, if you have the people who are filming you, the camera people or the person who's in the control room, the person who's in the control room is watching the time. So they'll talk to the camera people. I'm putting my, like if I have headphones on, they'll talk to the camera people and they can give you countdowns. So I always have somebody count me in, which they're gonna do anyways. But some people will count you in and just be like go. And then some people will be like, all right, you have a minute until, I forget the words right now, a minute until we're filming. And they'll be like 30 seconds, quiet on set, and 10 seconds, and then they'll count you in, and then you introduce your show, The end, I generally have a 5 and a 2, because I know how 2 minutes, 2 minute is the wrap up. That's when you start saying, well, wow, you've given us such great information, But, so my history and law show with my personal professor, he's amazing. He has so much info. We get to a point where sometimes it'll start off a little bit slower, but then he'll start giving me all the goods in the last 10 minutes of the show. And I'm just like, I want to know more. Oh my goodness. And then I have to cut it. I have to do that thing where I have to cut him off. So then it's but he also knows that he can get, because he's a teacher. He's a professor. That's what he does, right? And he loves the information that he's giving. I love the information that he's giving. I could sit there and talk to him forever, and I do. We get out of shooting, and then we continue the conversation, always when the cameras are off. Sometimes we have better content when the cameras are off than when they're on. But I'll get a 5 minute, and in the beginning, I used to give him a cue. So I'll tell the guests, hey, if you see me shift my hands in a certain way, or if I shift my body like this, or if I do something like this, then then I'm about to wrap up. And sometimes I have to say, I'm so sorry that we are about to wrap up right now because this is such great information. And sometimes the camera person is because I've already gone over that 5 minute time. And I'm just like, oh my goodness, this has been so great. Thank you all so much for tuning in. This has been History and Law. And then they stop and that's it. And they have to edit some things in post. But I forget now what your question was. Oh, timing. That's how sometimes you have to manage it. Get a feel for how long 20 minutes is. Get a feel for how long 55 minutes is. You know what I mean? If you're ever doing just have a conversation with a friend in a coffee shop and look at your watch and see how look at your watch. We're all wearing watches, right? Ed, are you wearing a watch? Yes, of course you are. I know. I don't. I'm a millennial. What can I say? But, right, because that's totally a generational thing, I think, sometimes. Well, some people my age. But anyways, you have your clock, you have your watch. Have a conversation in a coffee shop and gauge the time. And then you'll get to know the flow. And you'll get to recognize when people get bored of talking. Sometimes people get tired while they're talking. So I'm a little tired, and now it's your turn to talk to each other.